Next, I'd like to welcome our speaker, Darren Milligan, who is the Acting Director of the Smithsonian Institution's Center for Learning and Digital Access in Washington, D.C. He specializes in strategy for educational impact through user-centered research and the development of tools and services for making online cultural and scientific heritage resources accessible and useful to educators and learners. It's really fantastic. It's again, we are talking about museum education, but really the strong focus is on digital learning, digital education, something we really all became to value very, very much during the pandemic. Personally, I've mainly worked with V&A, Getty, and particularly the Heilbronn timeline of art at the Met. And then I discovered the Smithsonian Learning Lab and thought it was extremely exciting. And this is why I invited Darren. So I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mimi, for the introduction as well. It's my great pleasure to be here this afternoon, or I guess this evening for many of you, to share a little bit of the story about how the Smithsonian is using collection digitization to empower educational outreach and really encourage what we call deeper learning in support of teachers, caregivers, and students. So I have my contact information there on the slide. So if we don't have time for covering all the questions today, I welcome you to reach out to me and to continue the conversation. I thought I'd start with a little bit about the Smithsonian itself. Oftentimes when talking to colleagues outside of the United States or to families outside of the United States, this is often what people know of the Smithsonian. This is from the 2009 film Night at the Museum Battle of the Smithsonian. But I often like to think more of this image, and Mimi reminded me this morning, this is actually our house museum. This is the 1849 James Renwick Smithsonian Castle building, which currently houses the Smithsonian Administration on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. But this was originally also a house. This housed the leadership of the Smithsonian and their families, as well as the first several generations of scientists and curators who worked under the umbrella of the Smithsonian in the 19th century, when our institution was founded 175 years ago. Since then, we've grown to become the world's largest museum, education, and research complex. And the Smithsonian now manages 19 museums in Washington, D.C. and New York City, as well as 9 international research centers, libraries, archives, and the National Zoo. We're often known amongst scholarly audiences for our collections, which are quite diverse. They cover iconic objects. This is the Hope Diamond, one of the world's largest deep blue diamonds. Contemporary cultural objects. This is the puffy shirt from the episode of Seinfeld, if you're familiar with that television show from the 80s and 90s. They cover art collections that have become icons.
Darren, sorry, hi.
Yes.
Actually, I think your screen is frozen because your slides are not moving.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's not on presenter's view.
Have you seen any of the slides?
No, they just moved, and we see now it's to your cover slide, your title slide.
Okay, let me see here.
But it's the
Is it changing?
It's the smaller version.
No.
You see, not the presenter's view.
Not changing.
Your slides are changing now, but when you click on presenter view, then
when I go to full screen,
they don't change. Yeah.
Okay.
I see. Okay. I will just stay in this view, I think, which will be fine.
Great.
Let me go back here.
That's working.
Great. Here's the castle building I spoke, in case you didn't see that earlier. That's our beautiful headquarters building. Fine, I'll start again here, I think, with art objects that have really become, in an educational perspective, icons of American history. So, on the left is Gilbert Stuart's 1796 portrait of George Washington, and on the right, Kehinde Wiley's portrait of President Barack Obama. Our collections as well include contemporary works of art. This is Electronic Superhighway, Continental US, Alaska, and Hawaii from 1995 by Nam June Paik at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. The collections includes objects that document the complex history of the United States. On the left here is a Lakota winter count that records events taking place between years 1800 and 1870. And on the right, a lunch counter from Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina, that was used in the 1960 youth-led movement to challenge racial inequality throughout the South. The collection includes objects that document 20th century technological achievements. On the left, many people powered heavier than air flying machine. And on the right, the Space Shuttle Discovery. This is one of 5 space shuttles that were in use in the 20th century and into the 21st century. This space shuttle was used for 27 years and had more space flights than any other. A vast majority of the collection of the Smithsonian, however, is in the natural history space. The Smithsonian has about 158 million objects in its collection, and about 90% of those are specimens. Here we see on the left entomology specimens, on the right botany algal collections. These are what we consider dry collections, but we also have wet collections. These are fishes at the National Museum of Natural History on the left. And on the right are nitrogen-cooled tanks that store the genetic information for currently about 5 million species. And finally, what we call our living collections. These are animals kept at our Conservation Biology Institute or at our National Zoo that are involved in captive breeding for species conservation. So all of these objects are made available to researchers and to the public under the Smithsonian's mission statement, which is the increase and diffusion of knowledge. And as I mentioned, the Smithsonian is really an educational institution at our heart, and teachers, specifically a group that I care a lot about, partially for really personal reasons. I love to share this photo. This is my grandfather in 1943 in his first year of teaching. He taught U.S. history in a public school in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, and occupied that classroom for 30 years. When he retired, this guy literally took over that classroom. This is my father, who also taught U.S. history. He's demonstrating one of the colonial stocks he had in his room. And when I think about what my grandfather's classroom was probably like, and really what I remember my father's classroom being like, I had him for several years as a high school student. What I picture is not too different than this. This is a photograph of a classroom in 1925 from the collection of the National Museum of American History. The students here are having identical learning experiences. They're all reading from the same textbook at the same pace in a very highly structured and very non-personalized manner. And the good news about education is that this style of education, which was developed largely in the 19th century, is changing very quickly. This is much more common of what a classroom might look like. And really over the past year, classrooms have looked a lot like this, in a sort of a blended learning environment in which students are engaged in much more self-directed, independent learning. What we've found at the center is that teachers are hungry for discovering the interdisciplinary connections between the subjects that they teach. And this is partially because existing teaching standards, both here in the United States and around the world, really require that. But they also recognize that the connections to the way the world really works are inherent in these kinds of interdisciplinary discussions. Teachers are hungry for the kinds of conversations that we have at museums, and they're hungry for resources and the tools to make this happen for their students as well. So I'm going to talk this morning a little bit about a tool to help position the Smithsonian at the center of these conversations, to the connections between the knowledge that we share and that we create here at the Smithsonian. I want to start back with an artwork that we sort of breezed past. Maybe you didn't see this earlier. Hopefully you caught a glimpse of it. This is a work of art called Electronic Superhighway. And I'm guessing that if you've been to Washington and visited the Smithsonian American Art Museum, you remember this piece. It's really a visitor favorite. The work is by a Korean American artist named Namjoon Paik, and shows how people across all of America are connected by media and by television. So Paik came to the United States in the 1960s and was influenced by the diversity of Americans, and both how the technology influenced but also represented our culture and our lives. He was a technologist. Paik made robots, really fascinated by technology, of how technology enables the transfer of information and how it unifies a country as diverse as the United States. In the mid-1990s, he made this work you can sort of tell by the photograph here about the dimensions of this space. Let's see if these videos will play. Yes, good. The work's made up of more than 300 televisions and neon tubes, and videos within each of the individual states that are outlined by the neon represent ideas or sometimes even stereotypes of Pike's view of America and Americans. Pike was really fascinated by the enabling potential of technology that was really emerging in the 1990s. So the internet is really what this work in a sense is about, and ways that the internet was enabling new digital connections. And so actually, if you visit Washington, DC, the part of the map that outlines the part of the map that's Washington, DC is actually a closed circuit television. So you can become part of the work itself. See if these videos will load. There we go. Pike is credited with coining the phrase electronic superhighway to refer to telecommunications and ultimately to the internet itself. And this work resonates with so many visitors who are visiting from the United States for the obvious geographic connections of finding where they're from and how it's represented, but also because of its sheer sort of electricity and power. So young and old really flock to this work at the museum, and it turns out that it really resonates with students in classrooms too. So I want to take a pause before moving on with the discussion to talk a little bit more about how we arrived at developing the Smithsonian Learning Lab and some of the questions that we began asking ourselves at the center. So the Center for Learning and Digital Access has existed for 30 years, and our focus is specifically on enabling learning by using our collections, typically outside of our museums or outside of Washington, DC or New York City, where our public spaces are available. And about 6 years ago, we started rethinking how we serve users online and started asking ourselves a series of questions. And the first one was really simple about how we could design a better website. How could we make a website that's more usable by teachers and by their students? And that led us, I think, to think about what our role as museum educators really is. And the traditional role, I think, of museum educators was to translate the exhibitions or the scholarship to a broader audience. So how can we help teachers explain our exhibitions to students? The more we started working with teachers and talking to teachers, that question began to evolve as we looked inward, as we had conversations externally. And that started us thinking about what is it that we are uniquely positioned, our collection is uniquely positioned to support with teachers and learners. And that led us to ask a very different question, which is not how can we share our knowledge with teachers, but what really do teachers need from a place like us? What do teachers need from museums or research centers, libraries, or archives? And that ultimately led to the final question that drove us, and is still the question that motivates us as we evolve the Smithsonian Learning Lab and continue to support online learning. And that's how can we help young people be successful in their lives? So I want to share with you a few, before formally introducing the Learning Lab, I want to show you a few examples of things that teachers have done with our digital collections. Let's see if these videos will load. There we go. Okay. What you're seeing here is an interactive learning experience created by Amanda Risk. Amanda is a teacher, and she's not an art history teacher or a geography teacher, but Amanda teaches math. And she's using electronic superhighway really in ways that stretch beyond what the museum traditionally may use this object for in terms of art history or American history. In the activity, Amanda challenges her students to understand the longevity of these, what you're seeing on the screen, these cathode ray tubes. This is the type of technology that Pike used in the televisions that make up the work. So her students apply principles of mathematics to understand the potential lifespan of this work of art, which is actually something that the conservation staff at the Smithsonian American Art Museum is challenged with in the real world. This next example is again not by an art teacher, but this time by an English teacher, Yolanda Toney. And Yolanda teaches English outside of Chicago, and she, in a way of introducing the novel called The Westing Game, she challenges her students as they work through the novel to compare the written work, how the book's author describes America, and then how Pike does in this artwork. So she integrated resources from, as you see here on the screen, Khan Academy, Wikipedia, the Chicago Tribune, in the Smithsonian Learning Lab, and and creates a writing activity in which students imagine themselves transported to one of the states as if it were represented by Pike's perspective. And these are just two examples of the ways that teachers have used one incredible artwork in novel ways. On the next screen here, I have a couple more examples. On the left here, this is a lesson on biography that uses artworks by a wide variety of Asian Pacific American artists. And on the right, another video made by a teacher who works with very young students. So she's using this artwork along with stamps and artifacts and other Smithsonian objects to introduce the concept of electricity to preschoolers. And what makes these tools, makes these experiences possible is a tool called the Smithsonian Learning Lab. And I'd invite you to visit learninglab.si.edu to create a free account and to explore some of these experiences as well. The Learning Lab was created by the Center for Learning and Digital Access in 2016. And these few examples of these Learning Lab collections, these learning experiences that we've made are just a few of more than 40,000 learning experiences that teachers across the world have made since our launch. We spent 3 years in really active research and evaluation to understand how teachers and their students use digital content in teaching and learning. We really hope to achieve two things with the Learning Lab. The first was to understand what teachers are doing in their classrooms. I mean, many of the things that people are doing on the Learning Lab now, they were doing in the past, but they were invisible to us. But having our own platform, we can understand how they use our materials. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, we wanted teachers to think of the Smithsonian, of museums, as more than just an event, more than just a field trip, but rather a rich resource, a place where they could see all the Smithsonian, a place where those interdisciplinary connections could emerge, to create a platform where they could learn from our own educators and really from each other. So I'm going to take you on the last remaining minute or two here. I'm going to take you on a real whirlwind tour of what's possible in the Learning Lab and invite you to continue exploring it yourself. So the Smithsonian Learning Lab is a very visual place. So searching for a bug pulls up incredible, beautiful high resolution images from across our collection. I mean, this is the sort of image I always think about when an insect is buzzing me. I'm annoyed that they're actually these incredibly beautiful animals. Beyond a discovery engine for currently about 6 million digitized objects from the Smithsonian, the set of tools encourages its users to aggregate those resources together, to upload material from their own life or from other digital sources, and to create digital learning opportunities for their students. So this is another collection like the others that we saw from Yolanda and Amanda. This one is about the history of the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States and how it represents aspects of our troubled history. You can see here on one of the resources within this collection, Kate Harris, who's the author of this collection, used the tools of the lab to highlight sections of objects, to annotate those, to transcribe text, and to build assessments directly into her learning experiences, all using the tools of the Learning Lab. Ultimately, we really are hoping to build a community of online learning. So amongst those 40,000 collections that are available to other users, you can copy other users' collections and adapt them. So this is a collection about the impacts of the Civil War on President Abraham Lincoln. Using the tools of the lab, again, I could copy this and make my own version. If you can see there, this went from Abraham Lincoln, the face of war, to Darren's Abraham Lincoln, and I've added some new resources into this. So I wanted people who were seeing my collection to be able to explore the 3D versions of these life masks of Abraham Lincoln, as well as have the information to download and print these on their own. So all of these tools are open to other museums as well. So there are hundreds of non-Smithsonian museums and other cultural heritage organizations around the world that are using these tools to highlight their own collections and to bring to light connections and correlations with the collection of the Smithsonian. This is really a tool that's unfinished. We're really just at the first chapter of understanding what our users do with these tools and the resources to personalize learning. So I invite you following today's conversation to visit the Learning Lab and to join in on that. So thank you again for having me today.
That was a fantastic tour de force through the Smithsonian Learning Lab. It's really amazing. And I think it's totally different from all the other sources that we would normally use, where we kind of use it, we copy it. But here we can actually create, we can work with the collection. It's an amazing resource. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to our discussion later. Thank you.